Listen here. One small topic, independent topic, we will complete it. See, like this in half an hour, like that and all, if we complete, no, peacefully we can complete the other chapters. That's why, huh? Please. So listen. E-way bill. So what is electronic way bill means? Before movement of goods, whatever goods you are taking from one location to another location, you need to inform the GST department. For that, we need to file one document. That document is known as e-way bill. Okay. And e-way bill is a document filed for the purpose of movement of goods. So when it is to be generated, before movement of goods or after movement of goods? Before movement of goods. So see this. First there should be movement of goods. Is e-way bill applicable in case of services? No. E-way bill is applicable only in case of goods. Is there a movement of goods? No. Then e-way bill is not necessary. And yes, there is movement of goods. Whether the goods are exempted, yes, then also e-way bill not necessary. So e-way bill is applicable only in case of taxable goods, not in case of exempted goods. Exempted goods includes non-taxable goods also. So only when it is a taxable product, we need to generate e-way bill. Now, is it interstate or out of India? No, means within the state. Within the state, we have state-specific e-way bill provisions that we need to follow. And it will not be tested in exam. So in exam, always we will have which provisions related to e-way bill? Interstate movement. Okay. Within the state movement, so we will not get questions because we have separate provisions for within the state. So that particular state will be giving the provisions. Now, suppose if it is interstate. Now, is it job work or handicrafts? Yes, then always e-way bill is required irrespective of the amount. If it is some other goods, e-way bill is required only when the value exceeds 50,000 per invoice. Again, I am repeating, listen. When e-way bill is required, only when the value of goods transported per invoice exceeds 50,000, then e-way bill is required. But there are two products, irrespective of its value, we need to generate e-way bill. What are those two products? Job work, goods sent on job work, and handicrafts. These two cases, always e-way bill is required. Now you may get a doubt. Sir, if the value of invoice does not exceed 50,000, then e-way bill is not required, which means whenever the value of goods is more than 50,000, we will prepare two invoices, sir. Invoice number 1 with 40,000, invoice number 2 with 30,000, so that each invoice, it does not exceed 50,000. So no need to generate e-way bill. Correct. You are not required to generate e-way bill. But these two invoices parcel will be transported by the transporter in a single lorry. So now the value of the goods transported in the vehicle exceeds 50,000. So transporter should generate e-way bill. You got it? Even though individually value of goods does not exceed 50,000, so the supplier is not generating e-way bill, but the value of all those goods transported in the vehicle exceeds 50,000, then the transporter has to generate e-way bill. Understood or not? Then, suppose if you are a registered dealer, then the seller will generate e-way bill. If the sender or seller is not registered, then we need to check whether recipient is registered. If recipient is registered, recipient shall generate e-way bill. If both are unregistered, but the product is taxable. Supplier unregistered, recipient unregistered, but the product is taxable. You understood or not? So, then how sir product is taxable? See, taxability of a product is not dependent on whether the supplier is registered or not. So, the product is taxable, but the supplier is unregistered, newly started business. Recipient also unregistered. Then in that case, who will generate e-way bill? Transporter will generate e-way bill. So, who will generate e-way bill? If supplier is registered, supplier. If supplier is unregistered and recipient is registered, recipient. If both are unregistered, transporter. Once again, can you repeat? If supplier is registered, if supplier is unregistered and recipient is registered, recipient. If both are unregistered, suppose if transporter says, sir, I don't know how to generate e-way bill. I am not that much educated. If I am educated like you, why I will be driving the vehicle? So then, in that case, seller or buyer can generate the e-way bill by enrolling as citizen of India using their permanent account number. They don't need a GST registration. Always e-way bill should be generated. So somehow e-way bill you have to generate. And what is the consequence of transportation of goods without e-way bill? N number of cases are reported. Now simple here. In that road, one vehicle is going with goods. Now proper officer, GST officer stopped that vehicle. Now that vehicle contains goods which is not having e-way bill, and those goods are taxable goods. Immediately the vehicle and the goods will be seized. The vehicle and the goods will be seized and they need to pay penalty. So only when they pay penalty, the goods will be released. And what is the penalty? 200% of tax payable. If tax is 1 lakh, how much they need to pay? 2 lakhs they need to pay. Then only the goods will be released. You understood the consequence of e-way bill, not generating e-way bill? Are you getting this? So therefore, ultimately, transporter will simply say, Ayya, I don't know e-way bill. It is your goods. So those goods will be taken by the department. He will happily unload those goods and he will take the lorry and he will go. You understood? Then the owner of the goods will have the problem. So that's why they are telling, even if transporter is not generating, either seller or buyer, enrolling as citizen of India, they need to generate e-way bill. So come on, first priority. Supplier is registered, supplier shall generate e-way bill. Supplier is unregistered and recipient is registered, recipient will generate e-way bill. If both are unregistered, transporter should generate e-way bill, else sender or recipient shall generate enrolling as citizen. And in e-way bill, what is the format of e-way bill? Form GST EWB1. Format of e-way bill is Form GST EWB1 and it will have two parts, Part A and Part B. Part A will contain invoice details, Part B will contain vehicle details. Okay. Part A they need to update, Part A they need to fill and generate e-way bill before movement of goods. However, there is a small relaxation for Part B. That is, if it is a intrastate transport distance up to 50 kilometers, within the state, transport distance is up to 50 kilometers, e-way bill not required, e-way bill required. E-way bill required, but Part B is not required. Part B is not required. That too, this transport distance is from place of business of the consignor to the transporter and transporter to the consignee. Okay. So that case, e-way bill is not required or required, but form Part B is not required. Now see this. First, there is a consignor. Where is that consignor? That consignor is located in, say, Chennai. The consignor is located in Chennai and transport office is in Chennai. Okay, transport office is also in Chennai. Now this distance is say 30 kilometers. This distance is 30 kilometers. E-way bill required or not required? Required. E-way bill required. But which one? Part A or Part B? Part A required, Part B not required. Okay. Now, so this transport office Chennai to transport office Bengaluru. Okay. This part you understood? Now, transport office Chennai to transport office Bengaluru. Transport office Bengaluru. So usually they will not pick up the goods at our place. We need to take the goods and hand it over to the transporter's place. Okay. So next to central railway station, lot of transporters are there. Okay. If you want to send goods from Chennai to Delhi, Chennai to Mumbai or anywhere, so you need to go there and hand over the parcel there. So they will be transporting it. Okay. So usually they will transport from transport office to transport office, which means So our consignee should come to the transport office and take the goods. Is it clear? Where the consignee, our consignee is located? Bengaluru. So therefore they need to come to the transport office and take. So Chennai transport office to Bengaluru transport office, say it is 480 kilometers. Whether e-way bill required? Of course required. And this e-way bill, part A or part B? Both. Both part A and part B require. Okay. Then again, up to this you understood? Thereafter, from transport office Bengaluru to consignee place. Consignee place in Bengaluru. Because he is not required to be staying next to transport office, na, little far he will be there. And suppose if the distance is 55 kilometers, somewhere in the outskirts he is there. Now in that case, e-way bill required? Yes. Part A and part B or only part A? Both part A and part B. What if this distance is less than 50 kilometers? Part B not required. Got the clarity here? So that is this point. Whether it is intrastate transport distance up to 50 kilometers, filing of part B not required. And what is the time limit within which part B, that is the vehicle number, we need to update? From the time we updated part A, we entered part A, within 15 days, we need to enter part B. You know what does it mean? Once we hand over the goods to the transporter, we completed part A, seller completed part A. Now the transporter should start transporting the goods within 15 days because he need to enter part B now. I gave the goods to the transporter. How will I know the vehicle number? Who knows the vehicle number? Transporter. Then who should update part B? Transporter. So means you need to update within 15 days from the time I completed part A. So update part B within 15 days from entering part A details. Suppose if it is my own vehicle, seller's own vehicle, seller will enter part B. Suppose you are sending your vehicle, in that I am loading the goods and sending. So recipient vehicle, so recipient will enter. Suppose if we are not owning any vehicle, there will be one third party transporter. So we hand over the goods to the transporter. Now who will enter the vehicle number? Transporter. So part B may be updated either by transporter or supplier or recipient as the case may be. Understood? So generally part B contains what? Vehicle details. Now look into the next page, validity of e-way bill. Every e-way bill generated will have a validity. So validity means within the time the vehicle should reach the destination. If the vehicle is not reaching the destination within the time, then they have to renew the e-way bill by specifying the reason why they could not reach. If they are not specifying the reason and not renewing the e-way bill, and if the vehicle is caught, it is as good as the vehicle is not having e-way bill and the goods will be seized. Insurance is expiring today midnight. Okay. And you went for a second show movie and you came, returned, and when you return, somewhere it is like 1:30 like that. Okay. So by 12 o'clock, insurance expired. Now you thought, okay, tomorrow we can renew like that. So 1 o'clock or 1:30, police will be there. Normal law and order police also will be there. And that police will stop and they will check the insurance. And the insurance expired. What they will ask? Okay, pay fine. Correct or not? Like that, once the validity of the e-way bill is expired, still if you are transporting the goods, validity expired, immediately put brake, open mobile, renew the e-way bill. You understood? So if you are traveling, then the goods will be confiscated, that is seized. So what is the validity of e-way bill? In case of over-dimensional cargo or multi-mode transportation. Over-dimensional cargo means what? Big lorry. So length will be big. Like they are carrying some turbine parts or aeroplane parts, etc. So that over-dimensional cargo. or multi-mode transportation. Multi-mode transportation means up to some distance by roadways, thereafter by waterways, thereafter by railways, like that. Multi-mode transportation in which at least one leg is by ship, means waterways. So up to some distance at least we are transporting by waterways. Then the validity will be 1 day for every 20 kilometers or part thereof. For example, 480 kilometers. 480 kilometers, what is the validity? 480 divided by 20. That is 480 divided by 20. 24 days will be taken as the validity. 490 divided by 20. 490 divided by 20. What is the fraction you got? 24 point. So therefore it should be taken as 25. Okay. 485 divided by 20. 24 points. It should be taken as 25. Any part thereof should be taken as the next number. So 24.1, 24.3, 24.5, 24.8, whatever may be part thereof, it should be taken as the next number. So therefore, 1 day for every 20 kilometers or part thereof. In any other case other than above, it will be 1 day for every 200 kilometers or part thereof. Same 480 kilometers. What is the validity? 3 days. How? First 200 1 day, next 200 1 day, remaining 80 kilometers 1 day. So 480 divided by 200, you will get 2 point something. So take it as 3. And the validity of e-way bill may be extended within 8 hours from the time of its expiry. So whenever the e-way bill is expired, validity is expired, from there within how much time we need to renew? 8 hours. And when sir e-way bill will expire, so e-way bill validity will be counted always from the midnight of the day it is generated to the midnight of the next day as 1 day. For example, today morning 10 o'clock we generated e-way bill. Now the validity will be counted from today midnight to next day midnight, 1 day. Then suppose if e-way bill is generated now 6 p.m. then also the validity will be counted from today midnight to tomorrow midnight, 1 day. Suppose if e-way bill is generated night 11:30 p.m. then also it will be counted from the midnight. You understood? So always the validity will be counted from the midnight of the day it is generated to the midnight of the next day will be counted as 1 day. Means e-way bill will always expire by midnight. Correct? 12 o'clock. So therefore, what is the time limit within which we need to renew the e-way bill? 8 hours. 8 hours means next day morning 8 a.m. the e-way bill needs to be extended. Okay. So see this. Illustration 1. Suppose an e-way bill is generated at 01 hours for 240 kilometers on March 8th. March 8th, early morning, like midnight of March 7th, and that day only it started. March 8th it started. So now the validity will be for how many days? 2 days. When the validity will end? 8th midnight to 9th midnight, 1 day. Correct? 8th only now we generated. So 8th midnight to 9th midnight, 1 day. 9th midnight to 10th midnight, 2nd day. So therefore the validity will end by 12 midnight of March 10. Always it is advisable to generate e-way bill in the early mornings. So that full day also we have for the purpose of validity. Okay. Then suppose e-way bill is generated at 01 hours for 140 kilometers on March 8th, where the goods are transported by over-dimensional cargo. How many days validity? 1 day for every 20 kilometers or part thereof. How many kilometers per? 140. 140 divided by 20, 7 days. So the validity will be counted from 8th March midnight. So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 7th day. So therefore 15th midnight it will end. You understood? Then FAQs on e-way bill. When e-way bill is not required, if it is transportation by non-motorized vehicle. Non-motorized vehicle means bullock cart, horse cart, etc. So no motor in that. So then that do not require e-way bill. That animal will die here, that much distance and all we cannot transport. So shorter distance only, that's why. Goods transported from customs port, airport, air cargo complex or land customs station. See, remember this second point and third point are single point. Goods which are transported under the customs controlled area. What is customs controlled area? Port, airport, land customs station, then inland container depot, warehouse, etc. These are all under whose control? Customs. Between the places if you are transporting, anyhow it is under the control of customs, therefore e-way bill is not required. So you need to remember customs controlled area. Customs controlled area. Then transit cargo transported to or from Nepal and Bhutan. Nepal and Bhutan are landlocked countries. So goods will be originally imported in India. Then it will go to Nepal and Bhutan. So that movement of goods will not through India only, but they do not require e-way bill because these goods are not for consumption in India. These goods are for consumption in Nepal and Bhutan. Then movement of goods for Ministry of Defence. So Ministry of Defence, if they transport any goods, what goods they will be transporting? Arms or ammunition or any weapons, etc. These goods, if they transport and if they tell which vehicle, from where to where, etc. and all, you will stop that vehicle and steal those weapons and you will again fight against the government itself. That's the reason why that do not require e-way bill. Then empty cargo containers are being transported because there is nothing inside the containers. It's empty containers, so that do not require a e-way bill. Then consignor transporting goods to or from between a place of business and a weighbridge for weighment at a distance of 20 kilometers accompanied by a delivery challan. Simple. A lorry, we take the goods inside the lorry and we need to know what is the weight of the goods. For that we know weight of the lorry without goods. So take the lorry to the weighbridge. Now you know what is the weight of the lorry with goods minus weight of the lorry without goods. You will know the weight of the goods. So for that reason we take the lorry to the weighbridge. So this lorry taken to the weighbridge, if that weighbridge is within 20 kilometers, that do not require e-way bill. Part B not required, e-way bill itself is not required. E-way bill itself is not required. Then goods transported by rail where the consignor of the goods is central government, state government or local authority. What is the difference between 8th point and 5th point? 8th point and 5th point. 5th point is defense goods. In which mode? Any mode. But other than defense, any other state government or central government, it is transported by rail. Then goods specified as exempt from e-way bill requirement in respective state or union territory. So states also will give some goods as exempted from e-way bill. For example, in Tamil Nadu, rice is given as notified goods. Means transportation of rice from one place to another place do not require e-way bill. Like that, states will specify some goods, that goods e-way bill not required. Then some goods are specified by central government. LPG for supply to household and non-domestic exempted category customer. So which cylinders? Household, which red color or blue color? Red color cylinders do not require e-way bill, but blue color cylinders require e-way bill. Then kerosene oil sold under public distribution system. Then postal baggage, that inland letters, postcards, post parcels that do not require. Natural or cultured pearls, jewelry, goldsmith and silversmith wares. Why? If you know in which vehicle they are transporting all these goods, you will stop that vehicle and money haste season 6. You understood or not? So due to that reason, and I will be professor, you all become the participants. So we will loot. We will see GRT jewelers will be taking in one lorry jewelry and all. So we will loot that lorry and we will go and settle somewhere. You understood or not? Then the C and all will not work out for us. But they will not report. They are not required to report because it is a sensitive data. So in which vehicle they are transporting goods, they will not report. So e-way bill not required. Used personal and household effects like relocating house from one place to another place. So that do not require any e-way bill. Now, this will be tested in MCQ. Which of the following cases e-way bill is not required? A, B, C, D. So, there it will be tested. This is FAQ 1 is very, very important. Then, whether e-way bill is required if movement of goods is not for supply. Whether the movement of goods is for supply or without supply, is it taxable goods? Yes, then e-way bill is required. Let it be under supply or without supply. For example, goods sent on job work is not a supply, and goods taken for sale on approval or on return basis is not a supply. Even though it is not a supply, it requires e-way bill. Whether 50,000 limit is for taxable goods or exempted goods. Taxable goods. Suppose in a document, if we have both taxable goods and exempted goods, take out exempted goods and see the taxable goods. If the value exceeds 50,000, e-way bill is required. Then, while computing invoice value, whether GST to be included or excluded, we need to include the GST part. Generally, value excludes GST. But in e-way bill provisions, value includes GST. Please keep this in mind. Generally, value excludes GST. But in e-way bill provisions, value includes GST. For example, value of goods is 48,000. 10% GST means it will be 50,400. You understood? Or 50,800. So more than 50,000. So therefore, definitely e-way bill will be required. Then, who will generate e-way bill? Already we discussed that. Registered person, if the value of goods is more than 50,000. Unregistered person, if the supplier is unregistered and recipient is registered, that recipient, otherwise transporter. Whether transporter is required to generate if supplier has not generated because invoice value does not exceed 50,000. This point also I said. Even though supplier has not generated e-way bill because the value does not exceed 50,000, but the value of all these goods transported in a vehicle exceeds 50,000, then e-way bill is required. How e-way bill will be generated in case of bill to ship to transaction? In bill to ship to transaction, what is bill to ship to transaction means? You are placing an order with me to deliver the goods to your customer. You understood? You are placing order with me to deliver the goods to your customer. So you will be my billing address and your customer is my shipping address. Now there are two supplies. One is between me and you, supplier and the billing address. Second is between billing address and the shipping address. You understood? Even though there are two supplies, but how many e-way bills are required? Only one e-way bill. In case of bill to ship to transaction, one e-way bill is sufficient and it can be generated either by consignor or consignee, even though there are two supplies involved, but a single e-way bill is sufficient. Is there any disqualification for generation of e-way bill? Yes. If you are not filing returns for 2 consecutive periods, you cannot generate e-way bill. Your e-way bill facility will be blocked. Which returns pa? GSTR 1, GSTR 3B or CMP 8. If these 3 returns are not filed for 2 consecutive periods, e-way bill cannot be generated. If goods are transported in public transport or by railways or airways, how vehicle number can be entered? In that case, vehicle number is not required, but they will give one document, airway bill number or bill of lading number. That number we need to enter. Can the goods be transported in one vehicle up to a distance and in another vehicle for the remaining distance? Yes. So, for that no need to generate a new e-way bill. In the regular e-way bill itself, multi-vehicle updation is possible. Okay. So, with this we completed e-way bill provisions. In this invoice and time of supply, we have only 3 sections. Section 31, that is due date of invoice. Section 12, time of supply in case of goods. Section 13, time of supply in case of services. First, due date of invoice, we need to remember just 6 points we have to remember. See, along with subsection, no need to remember, just the situation and the due date of invoice try to remember. All this due date of invoice is given in section 31. So, in that section 31, total 6 situations we have. For goods, 3 situations. For services, 3 situations. For goods, 3 situations, that is normal cases, continuous supply of goods, sale on approval or on return basis. So, continuous supply of goods means there will be successive supply of goods for which the payments are settled on a periodical basis. For example, so I am supplying the goods on a daily basis and we maintain a running account, and on a weekly basis or 15 days once or monthly basis or quarterly basis the payments are settled. So that is called as continuous supply of goods. Then sale on approval or on return basis means I hand over the goods to you to use it, and I will give you a time limit. So if you like it, you can buy, otherwise you can return. That is known as sale on approval or on return basis. So in case of normal cases, so we need to check supply involves movement of goods or supply does not involve movement of goods. If supply involves movement of goods, then the due date of invoice is at the time of removal. If supply does not involve movement of goods, at the time of delivery. So what is the meaning of supply involving movement of goods? Under the contract of supply, goods start from one place and goes to the other place. For example, when you place an order in Amazon or Flipkart, so the sale is completed only when the goods are delivered to you. So under the contract of supply, goods are starting from one place to another place. So that is known as supply involving movement of goods. In that case, when they need to raise invoice, at the time of removal. So whenever they are removing from their place, at the time itself they need to raise invoice. Suppose if you go to a supermarket, you purchase some goods and you carry that goods to your home. Even though there is movement of goods, but that is without involving supply. Supply does not involve movement of goods, but there is movement of goods. Movement of goods is after supply. So therefore supply does not involve movement of goods. Then we will take at the time of delivery. That's why whenever they hand over the package or whenever they hand over the goods to you, so they will be giving the bill also. So supply does not involve movement of goods, at the time of delivery will be taken. But in exam, we need to identify what is supply involving movement of goods or supply does not involve movement of goods. So because depending upon that only provision will differ. So for that I have given few situations. You can see in the next page to understand what is the meaning of supply involving movement of goods versus supply does not involve movement of goods. So this I have not given in the previous book. So have a look into this situation 1. Buyer places order with the seller. Seller dispatches the goods to the buyer. Buyer takes delivery of the goods and the supply is concluded. Now, supply involving movement of goods or supply does not involve movement of goods. Why supply involves movement of goods? Because seller dispatches the goods to the buyer. So which means under the contract of supply, goods are starting from one place and going to another place. So therefore, buyer takes delivery and supply is concluded only when buyer takes delivery. So which means under the contract of supply, goods are going from one location to another location. So supply involves movement of goods. Then situation 2. Situation 2, buyer places order with seller to install generator at the premises of buyer. Now seller brings the material, not generator, material required for making a generator and installs the generator at the buyer's premises. So the generator comes into existence at which place? Only at the buyer's place, and seller transfers the generator to the buyer, that is transfer of title. Now in this case, supply involves movement of goods or supply does not involve movement of goods. Why does not involve movement of goods? The goods here is generator that comes into existence only at the buyer's place. So therefore supply does not involve movement of goods. Once the generator comes into existence, thereafter there is no movement of generator now. So due to that reason, supply does not involve movement of goods. Then situation 3, buyer visits seller's place, buyer make purchase of goods, buyer transports the same to his place. So buyer purchases the goods, means sale is completed at the seller's place. Now, is it supply involving movement of goods? No. Even though buyer transports the same to his place, but that is after the supply gets terminated. So which means that supply does not involve movement of goods. Then situation 4, seller takes goods to buyer's premises. Order not placed by the buyer. Okay. Seller is only voluntarily taking the goods to the buyer's premises. Buyer did not place any order. Now seller offers the goods for sale to the buyer. Seller is telling you need this product, you can buy like that. Before buyer purchases the same and seller delivers the goods. Now, is it supply involving movement of goods? Why supply does not involve movement of goods? Because at the time when there is movement of goods, there is no supply. So at the time when I am seller taking the goods to your place, you did not place any order. So I don't know whether you will buy or not. So therefore, there is no supply at the time of movement of goods. And whenever supply happens, thereafter there is no movement of goods because we deliver the product at the buyer's place. So again, in this case, supply does not involve movement of goods. Situation 5. Ship is located at Mumbai port belonging to Mr. A. Mr. A in Tamil Nadu sold the ship to Mr. B of Kerala by way of transfer of documents. Mr. B takes control of the ship in Mumbai port. Now in this case, if you see, so supply involves movement of goods or supply does not involve movement of goods? Does not involve, because where the ship is located in Mumbai only. So now what is transferred from seller to buyer is only the documents of title, ownership title or deed. So therefore in this case the goods are in that location only. So therefore supply does not involve movement of goods. So these are the situations that could be tested in exam. So be careful, analyze it. So any question will be in these situations. So accordingly you need to change. So if supply involves movement of goods, then what will be taken as the due date of invoice at the time of removal? Supply does not involve movement of goods at the time of delivery. Continuous supply of goods. Continuous supply of goods means successive supply of goods for which the payments are settled on a periodical basis. In case of continuous supply of goods, we need to check whether there is payments received irrespective of the account statement or payments are received based on account statement. Account statement means whenever I am selling goods to you on a daily basis, I will maintain one list. So then I will share that list with you and then I will collect the money. So therefore when payments are collected, irrespective of account statement means ad hoc some amount will be collected. Then for that the due date of invoice is at the time of receipt of payment. Suppose if the payments are collected based on account statement, the account statement date, not payment received date or account statement date, whichever is earlier, not that. Okay. For example, you can see one illustration to understand this. So take page number 62, look into illustration 2. Arjun Chemicals Tamil Nadu entered into contract with an ancillary industry to supply chemicals through pipeline. The payment terms, an ad hoc amount of 2 lakh per month is payable and the differential of 56,000 settled on a quarterly basis through account statement dated 6/7. So here what happens here is that the contract is like 3 months. For every 3 months the payments will be settled. But in that 3 months, every month they will receive some amount, 2 lakhs, 2 lakhs, 2 lakhs. Again after 3 months, they will see how much is the actual amount minus this 6 lakhs, the differential amount will be collected through account statement. Now, first 2 lakhs is collected based on account statement or irrespective of account statement? Irrespective of account statement. So what will be taken as the due date of invoice? As and when it is collected. What is the date on which it is collected? See below, 4th May. So that 4th May will be taken as the due date of invoice. Second 2 lakhs also collected irrespective of account statement. So whenever it is collected will be taken as due date of invoice. Third 2 lakhs also collected irrespective of account statement. So whenever it is collected will be taken as the due date of invoice. However, the differential amount 56,000, how recipient will know? Only based on account statement. So that 56,000 is collected based on account statement. Based on account statement. So account statement date will be taken as the due date of invoice. What is the account statement date? 6/7. So 6/7 will be taken as the due date of invoice. Are you understanding this? If it is whichever is earlier, then in the third case it should be 6/7, not 10/7. If it is whichever is earlier, that is account statement date or payment received date, whichever is earlier, then in this case it should not be 10/7 na, because whichever is earlier is 6/7. So that's why don't remember it as whichever is earlier. How you need to remember in case of continuous supply of goods? Come on. If the payments are received irrespective of account statement, payment received date. If the payments are received based on account statement, due date of invoice is account statement date. That is in case of continuous supply of goods. Then come back to sale on approval or on return basis. In case of sale on approval or return basis, 6 months from the date of removal or date of acceptance by the buyer, whichever is earlier. Because first we deliver the product and only when the buyer accepts, the sale will take place. But for that, if buyer is not accepting within 6 months, after 6 months it is deemed that the sale has taken place. So what is the time limit within which buyer should either accept or return? 6 months. Otherwise it will be treated as sale. So therefore, what will be the due date of invoice in this case? 6 months from the date of removal or date of acceptance by buyer, whichever is earlier. Now, these three situations, can you tell me? First, normal cases. What is the due date of invoice? Goods, normal cases. Supply involves movement of goods at the time of removal. Supply does not involve movement of goods at the time of delivery. Good. Then continuous supply of goods. Payment received based on account statement date. Payment received irrespective of account statement, payment received date. Then next, sale on approval or on return basis. 6 months from the date of removal or date of acceptance by the buyer, whichever is earlier. Then look into services. Services, normal cases, continuous supply of service, cessation of service. Normal cases, if it is banking and other financial services or insurance services, 45 days from the date of completion. That will be taken as the due date of invoice, which means whenever the service is completed, from that date within 45 days, invoice needs to be raised. If it is others, 30 days from the date of completion. Got it? So banking service or insurance service, what is the time limit by which invoice should be raised? 45 days from the date of completion. If it is others, 30 days from the date of completion. Then continuous supply of services. In case of continuous supply of service, what is continuous supply of service means? A service which takes more than 3 months to complete and involves periodic payment obligations, that is installments. Then it will be called as a continuous supply of service. So two conditions should be satisfied. First, it should take more than 3 months to complete and it should involve installment facility. Then it is a continuous supply of service. For example, you will be attending CA intermediate coaching. CA intermediate coaching, regular coaching, will it take more than 3 months to complete? Yes, definitely it will take more than 3 months to complete. And if installment facility is involved, it is a continuous supply of service. If there is no installment facility, it is not a continuous supply of service. Understood or not? Then, in case of continuous supply of service, we need to check whether due date of installment is ascertainable from the contract. Like on 5th January you have to pay this much, on 25th February you have to pay this much, on 8th March you have to pay this much. Like that, clearly the date and the installments are given. Then due date of installment is the due date of invoice. Is it clear? The date by which you need to pay that installment, that date is only known as due date of invoice. If due date of installment is ascertainable from the contract, such due date of installment. Suppose if the payment is linked to completion of an event, for example, in case of construction, they will say upon 30% completion you have to pay this much, upon 60% completion you have to pay this much, upon 100% completion you have to pay this much, like that. So they are linking it to completion. Now, when payment is linked to completion of an event, as and when that event is completed, invoice needs to be raised. Means whenever the 30% is completed, we need to raise invoice for the 30% amount. And whenever 60% is completed, we need to raise invoice for that amount. Understood or not? Then suppose neither we have the due date of installment in the contract, nor the payment is linked to completion of event, then as and when the payment is received. So that will be taken as the due date of invoice. 3 points. If due date of installment is ascertainable from the contract, the due date of installment. If due date of installment not ascertainable, but the payment is linked to completion of event, the date on which the payment is received. Suppose in the absence of these two, so that is if the payment is linked to completion of event, the date on which event is completed. In the absence of these two, as and when the payment is actually received. Then cessation of service. Cessation of service means abruptly stopping the service is known as cessation of service. Usually the cinema actors, what they do is that they sign a contract and they act for some 5 days or 10 days. Maybe there could be some difference of opinion between the director and the hero. So then the hero will walk out of the movie or the director will walk out of the movie. So then in that case, so what will happen? For the number of days they work for that movie, they will be receiving money from the producer. So therefore, this is known as cessation of service. So they entered into contract to provide the service, but they abruptly stopped providing the service. But for number of days for which they work, they need to collect money now. So when they need to give invoice, immediately upon cessation, no time limit, 30 days, 45 days and all. So say for example, a hero has signed a movie for 50 days and 5 days he acted in that movie. He came out after 5 days. Then immediately the 6th day, he need to give invoice for that 5 days amount. You understood? That is cessation of service. So tell me what are the 3 points in case of services, due date of invoice. Normal cases, banking and other financial services, insurance service, 45 days from the date of completion. All other cases, 30 days from the date of completion. Then continuous supply of service. Due date of installment ascertainable, that due date of installment. Payment linked to completion of event, date of completion of event. Otherwise, date on which payment is received. Then in case of cessation of service, immediately upon cessation. Now look into one question related to this. Illustration 1 in page number 62. P Limited provides maintenance services to companies having computers in their offices in Maharashtra. On September 20, 2020, it enters into contract with Z Limited, where P Limited will maintain computers of Z Limited during October 1, 2020 and December 15, 2020 for an agreed consideration of 2 crore plus applicable GST. Due date of payment is October 20, first installment, November 20, second installment, December 20, third installment, and provision of service is completed on December 15. Payment is however made by Z on March 1st when the tax invoice should be issued. So due date of installment is ascertainable from the contract. So therefore due date of installment will be taken as the due date of invoice. Therefore first installment October 20 is the due date of invoice. Second installment November 20 is the due date of invoice. Third installment December 20 is the due date of invoice. Absolutely wrong. Because first of all it is not a continuous supply of service. Because check when they started service and when the service got completed. So the service is started on October 1st and it is completed on December 15. Means the service is not more than 3 months. So please look out for this in the question. So always, what is a continuous supply of service? A service which takes more than 3 months to complete. But here how many months it takes? 2.5 months. So it is not a continuous supply of service. Then it is a normal service. In case of normal service, when the invoice should be given, banking and finance or insurance are others. So 30 days from the date of completion. What is the date of completion? December 15. From December 15 you count 30 days. So that will be January 14. So January 14 will be the due date of invoice. Is it clear? Understood, pa? So we should not apply continuous supply of service in this case, because first of all, even though installments are there, but the service takes not more than 3 months to complete. That's why not a continuous supply of service. So these are the due date of invoice that we need to remember. So we completed 6 situations. What is the due date of invoice? Now we are moving on to section 12 and 13, that is time of supply in case of goods, section 12, time of supply in case of services, section 13. What is the purpose of time of supply? Mainly time of supply is to determine the due date of payment of GST. For example, if time of supply for a transaction falls in this month, then we need to pay GST by next month 20th. So that is the due date. So mainly when we need to pay tax depends upon the time of supply. So the objective of time of supply is mainly to determine the due date of payment of GST. Not only that, to determine the exchange rate. Because if you remember in value of supply, I told you exchange rate, CBIC notified rate or GAAP rate prevailing on the time of supply should be taken. Okay. So therefore, whenever the transaction is denominated in foreign currency, so that foreign currency needs to be converted into Indian rupees. For that purpose, so we need to take a exchange rate. So that exchange rate will be CBIC or GAAP rate. So it's not there in syllabus, so no issue, don't worry about that. But mainly what you need to know is, so on the time of supply, whatever is the exchange rate, that should be taken. Again, rate of GST. Which rate of GST should be taken? So on the date of signing the contract, one rate will be there. At the time when we actually provide service, one rate will be there. So which rate should be taken? Again, time of supply. So what is the objective of time of supply? Three objectives: to determine the due date of payment of GST, to determine the rate of GST, and to determine the exchange rate. Okay. So kindly make note of this somewhere. Objective of time of supply. Objective of time of supply. Objective of time of supply. Objectives of time of supply. So three objectives. Number one, to determine due date of GST. Number two, to determine rate of GST. And number three, to determine exchange rate. So these are the three objectives of time of supply. To determine due date of GST, to determine rate of GST, to determine exchange rate. This time of supply in case of goods is determined under section 12, and in case of services it will be section 13. Now you can see here in this 12 and 13 we have common provisions. So 12 subsection 1 and 13 subsection 1 says liability to pay GST is determined on the basis of time of supply. So therefore liability to pay GST depends upon time of supply, and this is common for both 12 and 13. Then 12 subsection 2, 13 subsection 2, if you see, so situation is same. In case of goods FCM it is 12.2. In case of service FCM it is 13 subsection 2. Then same way 12 subsection 3, 13 subsection 3, situation is same. So in case of goods RCM 12.3, service RCM 13.3. So but provisions are different. So therefore we need to remember 4 points first. Goods FCM, services FCM, goods RCM, services RCM. Okay. Then next 12 subsection 4 and 13 subsection 4, both situation and provision is same. That is time of supply in case of vouchers. So this is point number 5 that you need to remember. Then 12.5 and 13.5, again situation and provision is same. That is time of supply in case when you are not able to determine the time of supply as per above provisions. Point number 6. Then in case of addition to value in the form of interest late fee, again that is also common between goods and services. So 7th point. So these are the 7 points that you need to remember. So first try to remember the situation. So first situation is what? Goods FCM. Second, service FCM. Third, goods RCM. 4, service RCM. Then 5, vouchers. 6, residual cases. 7, interest late fee penalty for delay in receipt of consideration. If we complete these 7 points, time of supply under 12 and 13 is over. So these 7 points only you need to remember. First, in case of goods under FCM, what is the time of supply? We are not learning the due date of invoice, already we completed that. Now we are looking into time of supply. The time of supply is due date of invoice or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier. In case of goods FCM, what is the provision pa? Due date of invoice or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Due date of invoice means the date on which you should give the invoice. Already we saw that. Supply involving movement of goods, supply does not involve movement of goods, continuous supply of goods, sale on approval, we already discussed. That is the due date by which you should give invoice. And the actual date on which you gave invoice, whichever is earlier. For example, due date of invoice is 5th of March, but actual date of invoice is 1st March. So which will be taken as the time of supply? 1st March. Suppose if due date of invoice is 5th March, I gave invoice on 8th March. So which will be taken as the time of supply? 5th March. So whichever is earlier. Can you remember pa? So goods FCM, what is the provision? Time of supply? Due date of invoice or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Then whether GST payable on advances in case of goods in this case? No. Why? Because say for example, March month we received the advance, but invoice we are raising in April. So what is the time of supply? April, invoice only. Is date of payment given there? Is date of payment given there? No. Which means that if the payment is received in March month, but invoice is raised in April month, so we need to pay GST for April month only, not in March month. Means no GST on advances. GST not payable on advances. Okay. Then, in case of services FCM, you see that if invoice is given within the due date, what is the due date for giving invoice? In case of services, already we know 45 days, 30 days, etc. We have discussed now. If invoice is given within the due date, then actual date of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Say for example, invoice is to be given within 30 days and I gave the invoice within 30 days. Say invoice date is 15th of March, but the date on which I received the payment is 20th of April. So which will be taken as a time of supply, whichever is earlier, 15th March will be taken. Suppose 15th March I gave invoice, but 1st March itself I received the payment. So which is earlier? 1st March. So whether GST payable on advances in this case? Yes, because date of payment is also one of the date. Suppose if payment is received in March and invoice is raised in April, which is earlier? March. So means we need to pay GST for that advance in the March. That's the reason why GST not payable on advances in case of goods, but GST payable on advances in case of services covered under FCM. Is it clear? Then suppose sir, if I am not giving invoice within the due date, what will happen? Say within 30 days or 45 days I need to give invoice, or continuous supply of service means within the due date, cessation of service means within the due date. If I have not given invoice within the due date, then what will be taken as the time of supply? Completion date or payment date, whichever is earlier. The date when service is completed, not invoice date. The date when service is completed or invoice payment date, whichever is earlier. So tell me two provisions you need to tell me. Goods FCM, service FCM. Come on, goods FCM, don't see book. Actual date of invoice or due date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Whether GST payable on advance in case of goods? No. Then services. Invoice is given within due date, invoice not given within due date. If invoice is given within due date, actual date of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier, good. If invoice not given within due date, completion date or payment date, whichever is earlier. Whether GST payable on advances in case of services, FCM, yes. Now we are moving on to the third point, that is goods RCM. In case of goods RCM, we don't know what are the goods which are covered under RCM. So that will be given in the question itself. Because goods RCM we don't have in syllabus for CA intermediate. So therefore, that will be given in the question itself. Now, from whose perspective we need to see? Because who is liable to pay GST? Supplier or recipient? Recipient. So see from the recipient perspective. Whenever recipient is receiving the goods, whenever recipient is making payment to supplier, or 31st day from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier will be taken as the time of supply. So, for example, I am selling goods to you on which you need to pay GST under RCM. The day on which you receive the goods. Second, the day on which you make the payment to me, or 31st day from the date of invoice. So, I give you an invoice now from that 31st day, whichever is earlier. Understood? The date on which recipient has received the goods, the date on which recipient is making payment to supplier, or 31st day from the date of invoice. Here also, is payment one of the dates? Yes. Whether GST payable on advances? Yes. Say, you gave me advance. Thereafter, I dispatch the goods to you. You receive the goods thereafter. 31st day also thereafter. But which is earlier? Payment received date is earlier. So therefore, whether GST payable on advances in case of goods RCM? Yes. Then, in case of services RCM, you see the difference. Goods RCM, 3 points. Date of receipt of goods, date on which payment is made to supplier, 31st day from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. But in case of services RCM, first date is not there. Only the second and third date. That is, date on which payment is made to supplier, instead of 31st day, it is replaced with 61st day from the date of invoice. Come on, tell me 2 points. Goods RCM and service RCM. Goods RCM, date on which goods are received by recipient, date on which payment is made to supplier, or 31st day from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Very good. Then services RCM, date on which payment is made to supplier, or 61st day from the date of invoice. So 4 provisions we have completed. That is goods FCM, service FCM, goods RCM, services RCM. Now we are moving on to the next 3, only 3 more. Vouchers. In case of vouchers, what will be taken as the time of supply? First of all, what is this vouchers? We need to understand. Vouchers are like consideration. Vouchers are like consideration for supply of goods or services. For example, you go to Reliance Trends and you purchase some dress. And when you buy the dress, say for example, for 3,000 rupees you purchased. When you purchase for 3,000 rupees, they gave you coupons. Okay. So they gave you a coupon for 500 rupees. And that is next time when you are coming to that shop and you buy garments worth rupees 1,500, you can redeem this 500 rupees voucher. Okay. So now say next time you went to the shop, you purchased garments for 2,000. So now you gave voucher 500 and you paid money 1,500. Now the shopkeeper should pay GST on 2,000, 1,500, 2,000, because the shopkeeper receives 500 rupees voucher and 1,500 cash, correct? But GST payable on entire 2,000. Why? Because voucher is treated as consideration. You understood or not? So voucher is treated as consideration against supply of goods or services. Let it be a gift voucher or you purchase that voucher, whatever it may be, the treatment will be same. Now, these vouchers are divided into 2. Identifiable voucher and non-identifiable voucher. Identifiable voucher means it can be redeemed against purchase of specific goods or services. That is known as identifiable voucher. For example, you go to Pizza Hut or you go to Domino's or you go to McDonald's. You eat food there and they give you one voucher. So next time when you visit, you can get one medium pizza free. What is this voucher? Identifiable voucher. Why? Because the product or the service is mentioned against the voucher. So then it will be called as identifiable voucher. Suppose if you get a voucher for 500 rupees, which means you can redeem any product worth rupees 500, correct or not? So which means that is non-identifiable voucher. The voucher can be redeemed against supply of any goods or services. So vouchers are divided into 2, identifiable voucher, non-identifiable voucher. Identifiable voucher means that can be redeemed against particular product or service. Non-identifiable voucher that can be redeemed against any product or service of the supplier. Now, in case of identifiable voucher, today I am giving you the voucher. Today itself I know against which product or service you are going to redeem this voucher, correct? Because it is identifiable voucher. So, I need to treat that this product is sold today itself or this service is rendered today itself. I need to pay GST. For example, today I am giving you one voucher for one medium pizza. Now, you will be redeeming it in future. But today itself I need to consider that I sold one medium pizza and I have to pay GST. Is it clear? So, in case of identifiable voucher, what is the time of supply? The date of issuance of voucher. But I did not sell pizza. But treating it as sale of pizza, I have paid GST. Now, you are not coming and redeeming that voucher. You are not at all coming and redeeming this voucher. Then, unnecessary I paid GST. That I will get it as a refund. You understood? Suppose if you redeem the voucher, at the time I give you the medium pizza, should I pay GST again at the time? No. Because already I paid the GST at the time of issuance of voucher itself. Understood the treatment in case of identifiable voucher? So, in case of identifiable voucher, what is the time of supply? At the time of issuance of voucher. Then, in case of non-identifiable voucher. Non-identifiable voucher, so I will know against which product or service you will redeem only when you redeem, correct? So today I don't know. So therefore, the time of supply is not at the time of issuance of voucher, at the time of redemption of voucher. So whenever you come to my shop and redeem that voucher and buy anything, at the time only I need to pay GST on that goods or services. Suppose if you are not coming and redeeming at all, I will not pay any GST on that. So which means the time of supply is only at the time of redemption. So the question of refund will not arise. So the question of refund will arise only in case of identifiable voucher, because today itself I would have paid GST considering that the sale has taken place, but at a later point of time when you are not redeeming voucher, I will get refund. But in case of non-identifiable voucher, first of all I will pay GST only when you come to my shop and redeem the voucher, otherwise I will not pay GST. Is it clear? Now what is that you need to remember in case of vouchers? Come on. Time of supply in case of voucher, identifiable. At the time of issuance of voucher, non-identifiable. Clear? Then, when time of supply is not ascertainable as per above provisions, that is in residual cases, simple, just remember. So, if a person is required to file return, the due date of filing return is the time of supply. If a person is not required to file return, as and when he pays tax, that date is the time of supply. Understood? So, suppose if time of supply cannot be ascertained as per above provisions because of not having sufficient information, so we will take, if the person is required to file returns, due date of filing return. If the person is not required to file return, date on which he pays the tax. Clear? So, residual cases, periodical return has been filed, due date of filing return, periodical return not filed, date of payment of tax. Then, last case, addition to value in the form of interest, late fee or penalty for delay in receipt of consideration. In case of interest, late fee or penalty for delay in receipt of consideration, so GST is payable on actual basis, that is as and when the interest is received. I told you long back. So interest is always taxable on receipt basis. So whenever it is actually received, that is the time of supply, not whenever it accrues. So whenever it is actually received. That is given in subsection 6. Now, I want you to tell me these 7 points. Come on, first, goods FCM. Don't see a book. Please close the book for some time. So, goods FCM. Actual date of invoice or due date of invoice, whichever is super pa. Then, services FCM. Two situations. Invoice given within due date, invoice not given within due date. Invoice given within due date. Or date of whichever is earlier. Good. Actual date of invoice or date of payment whichever is earlier. Then if invoice is not given within due date, completion date or payment date whichever is earlier. Super. Then goods RCM. Date of receipt of goods, date on which payment is made to supplier or 31st day from the date of invoice whichever is earlier. Good. Services RCM. Date on which payment is made to supplier or 61st day from the date of invoice whichever is earlier. Very good. Then vouchers. Identifiable at the time of issuance. Non-identifiable at the time of redemption. Then in case of residual cases, periodical return required to be filed, not filed. Periodical return required to be filed, not required to be filed. Required to be filed, due date of return. Not required to be filed, date of payment of tax. Then interest, late fee, penalty. As and when it is actually over pa. So this is about 12 and 13. Now on this time of supply, we have some additional points. Have a look into that. What will be considered as the date of payment? In case of supplier, the date on which supplier enters in his books or date on which the supplier's bank account gets credited, whichever is earlier will be taken as the date of payment received. Suppose you give me a check, I will pass a journal entry, then I will send a check for collection. Thereafter, my bank account gets credited. Whichever is earlier is the date on which I made an entry in my books. Suppose you make a NEFT RTGS transfer, fund transfer. So money I will receive in my bank account first. Then after BRS, I will enter the entry in my books. So whichever is earlier is the date of credit in my bank account. Okay. So what is the meaning of date of payment from supplier point of view? Date of entry in the books of supplier or date of credit in the bank account of supplier, whichever is. From recipient point of view, date of entry in the books of recipient or date of debit in the bank account of the recipient, whichever is earlier. Then in case of goods covered under FCM, whether GST payable on advances? No. But in case of services covered under FCM, whether GST payable on advances? Yes. As GST payable on advances in case of services, so therefore, if some advance is received this month, for which we are raising invoice next month, when we need to pay GST? No, advance received this month. For this advance, we are raising invoice next month. Service it is. Okay. So when we need to pay GST? This month or next month? Whichever is earlier. This month. So we need to pay GST this month. Because GST payable on advances in case of services. So in case of services, if we receive advance this month, but for this advance, if we raise invoice next month, the time of supply will be whichever is earlier. So this month itself we need to pay tax. However, there is a small relaxation we have. That is, if the excess amount received is up to 1,000 rupees beyond the invoice. For example, I invoiced you for 5,120 rupees. I invoiced you for 5,120. But you gave me 6,000 rupees because this difference anyhow will be adjusted in the next month. So you gave me extra. So you gave me extra how much? So 6,000 minus 5,120, that is 880 rupees. You gave me extra. Okay. This 880 rupees extra amount received this month, for which invoice will be raised in the next month. Logically speaking, I have to pay tax this month itself now, whichever is earlier. But I have an option to pay GST on this 880 rupees at the time of invoice itself, that is in the next month itself. But this facility I will get only if the excess amount received is up to 1,000 per invoice. Up to 1,000 rupees received in excess of the invoice. In case of services covered under FCM, time of supply can be date of invoice or determined as per section 13 subsection 2. So supplier has the option to choose. Means either 13 subsection 2 means what? Invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier, or we can go only as per date of invoice, and the supplier has option to choose. Understood? But this facility, when the supplier will be getting only if the excess amount is up to 1,000 per invoice. Then suppose if I raise invoice for 5,120 and you gave me 6,500 rupees. Now in that case, beyond 1,000 rupees, so therefore this facility I will not get. So this month itself I have to pay GST on that excess amount received. Then in case of supply between associated enterprises. So associated enterprises is defined under Income Tax Act section 92A, which is not applicable for you, but it will be given in the question itself that they are associated enterprises. You remember, to become associated enterprises, one company should invest 26% in the other, then they are associated. But definitely it will be given in the question as to associated enterprises. You are importing services from associated enterprises. Generally, in case of import of service, what will be taken as the time of supply? Import of service is FCM or RCM? RCM. In case of import of service RCM, what will be generally taken as the time of supply? Date on which payment is made to supplier, or 61st day from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. But between associated enterprises, there is no invoice. That's why what they are telling, take date on which payment is made to supplier. Instead of 61st day from the date of invoice, you take date of entry in the books of recipient, whichever is earlier. So in case of supply of service between associated enterprises, where supplier is outside India and recipient in India, time of supply shall be date of entry in the books of recipient or date of payment to supplier, whichever is earlier. Generally, we take date of payment to supplier or 61st day from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier. That 61st day from the date of invoice is replaced with date of entry in the books of recipient. Then, when goods are taken outside India for exhibition, is it supplied today? No. But within 6 months, the goods should be either sold or should be brought back. Otherwise, that sale on approval or on return point gets subtracted, and after expiry of 6 months, the goods are deemed to have been sold. Understood? When goods are taken outside for exhibition, what is the time limit within which it should be brought back? 6 months. Otherwise, it is deemed to be supply as per 31 subsection 7, that is sale on approval or on return basis. 6 months from the date of removal or date of supply, acceptance, whichever is earlier. So within 6 months, if it is not brought back or not sold, it is deemed to have been supplied. Then look into illustration 3. So we completed time of supply in case of goods, services, section 12 and 13 fully we completed along with additional points. See this illustration 3. Miss Rima purchased a gift voucher from Shopper Stop, a departmental store, worth rupees 2500 on 30/10/2020 and gifted it to her friend on occasion of her birthday on 4/12. Her friend encashed the same on 1/1 for purchase of a handbag. Determine the time of supply. Now tell me, is it identifiable voucher or non-identifiable voucher? Non-identifiable voucher. What will be taken as the time of supply in case of non-identifiable voucher? At the time of redemption. What is the date of redemption of this voucher? 1/1/2021. So that will be taken as the time of supply. Then next, illustration 4. Mr. A registered person, received goods from Mr. B, an unregistered dealer. Mr. B issues invoice on 30th June 2020. The said goods are notified for the purpose of section 9 subsection 4. So which means goods covered under RCM. Goods covered under RCM, what is the provision? Date of receipt of goods. So here find the time of supply in the following independent cases. A received the goods on 15 July. So 15 July. Then second, date on which payment is made to supplier. Payment is not yet made. Then third, 31st day from the date of invoice. What is 31st day from the date of invoice? 31st July. So 15th July or 31st July, whichever is earlier, 15 July will be time of supply. Second case, you tell me. Second case. 3rd August, goods received. Payment made 4th August. 31st day is 31st July, whichever is earlier. Understood? Date of receipt of goods 3rd August. Date on which payment is made to supplier 4th August. 31st day from the date of invoice is 31st July, whichever is earlier, 31st July. Next, the third one. 8th July. Why? Whichever is earlier is 8th July. Payment date 8th July. Received goods on 8th July. 31st July. Whichever is earlier, 8th July. Then fourth case. 9th July, 10th July goods are received, payment 9th July and 31st July, whichever is earlier, 9th July. Understood? Then illustration 5. Mr. X, a registered supplier, supplied certain goods to Mr. Y on 6 months credit with a penalty clause in the agreement, levying a penalty of 12% per annum of the invoice value in case of delayed payment. The invoice was dated 1/12/2017 and the invoice value was 20,000. Mr. Y could not make the payment on the due date due to unavoidable reasons. He, however, made the payment of the invoice value on 1/6/2018. So you change this to 5 months. So not 6 months, you change this to 5 months. 5 months. So when is the invoice raised? 1/12 means December month. So what is the time limit within which the payment should be made? December, January, February, March, April. So by 1st May, the payment should be made. But when the payment is made? On 1st June. So what is the delay? 1 month delay. Correct? Sir, 1st December to 1st January, 1 month. Then 1st February, 1st March, 1st April, 1st May. So that is the 5 months. So therefore 1st June it is made. So there is a delay by 1 month. So Mr. X raised the debit note for the penalty amount. There being dispute on this, the matter was in arbitration, which was finally resolved with Mr. Y agreeing to pay half of the penalty amount. So what is the penalty here? 1 month delay for 1 month on 20,000. So 20,000 into 12% into 1/12. So that is 200 rupees. But in that 200 rupees, how much paid? Only half is paid. Means 100 rupees is only paid. So 100 rupees only taxable, because interest, late fee, penalty, only the actual amount received is taxable. That too on the date when it is actually received. That is 12/12/2018. Understood? Then next we have various documents involved in GST. Mainly this is for short note or MCQ questions. So first, tax invoice. Already we have seen tax invoice. So who will give tax invoice? Supplier to recipient. But in one case, recipient will give tax invoice to supplier. When? In case of RCM. Generally, if supplier is registered, supplier will issue. But if supplier is unregistered, and recipient will issue in case of RCM. And tax invoice in case of taxable goods and taxable services. What is the time limit by which the tax invoice needs to be issued? So the time limit already we have seen. So that is 30 days, 45 days, supply involving movement of goods, etc. as per that. Then bill of supply. Bill of supply is a document that is to be issued in case of exempted supply of goods or services. A registered person making taxable supplies, tax invoice. A registered person making exempted supplies, bill of supply. Or paying tax under composition scheme, because a person opting for composition scheme cannot collect GST from the customer. So they need to pay GST out of their pocket. So due to that reason, they cannot give tax invoice, but the name of the document will be bill of supply. So who will give bill of supply? A registered person making exempted supplies or a person opting for composition scheme. And what is the time limit for bill of supply? Same as the time limit for tax invoice. Then in case of low value supplies, low value supply means value of supply less than 200 rupees. In case of value of supply less than 200 rupees, neither tax invoice nor bill of supply is required if three conditions are satisfied. Condition number 1, the recipient is unregistered. Condition number 2, recipient do not require tax invoice. Condition number 3, a consolidated invoice should be prepared at the end of the day for accounting purpose. No need to give it to anyone, but for accounting purpose we need to prepare. So low value supply means value of supply, each supply. For example, you go to one shop, purchase one chips packet and one Coke bottle. So it does not exceed 200 rupees. Now in that case, they don't have to give tax invoice if it is a B2C supply, means supply to an unregistered person. Number 2, recipient is not asking for tax invoice, but all these low value supplies, they have to enter in a consolidated invoice, prepare it at the end of the day. However, there is one exception to this, that is in case of cinema theaters, multiplex cinema theaters, even if the value of ticket is less than 200 rupees, but they need to give an invoice. In that case, e-ticket is considered as tax invoice. You can see the note. In case of multiplex theater, an invoice, e-ticket deemed as invoice to be issued even if value of supply is less than 200. Less than 200 per, not equal to 200. If it is equal to 200, that is not called as low value supply. Then say this. So registered person making supply of goods or service, if they make taxable supply, they will give tax invoice. If they make exempted supplies, they will give bill of supply. If they make both taxable and exempted supplies, if it is B2B, separate tax invoice and separate bill of supply. But if it is B2C, means in single document itself, they can mention both taxable supplies as well as exempted supplies. That is called as single tax invoice cum bill of supply. But this single tax invoice cum bill of supply is only in case of B2C. Then revised tax invoice. Revised tax invoice means whenever I am liable to get registered and I make application for registration within 30 days. Say I commenced business on 25/5/2022. Then I crossed the aggregate turnover. Threshold limit. I crossed the aggregate turnover threshold limit on 30/9/2022. Thereafter, I will make application for registration REG1. Application for registration REG1 I am making on 25th October 2022. Thereafter, I got the registration certificate on 5th of November 2022. I got registration certificate REG6. Now, between 39/2022 to 5/11, between 39/2022 to 5/11, I will make some inward supplies during this period. So, these inward supplies, so I can take ITC, no issue. I can take ITC. But when I can take ITC? After 5/11. Same way, this period, I will make outward supplies. So, for these outward supplies, I have to pay GST. But to pay this GST, I cannot recover the GST from my customer as and when supply takes place. Then when I can recover GST? After 5/11, I can recover the GST for supplies between this period, and that should be by giving revised tax invoice. And what is the time limit by which I need to give revised tax invoice? By 5/12/2022, that is within 1 month. Within 1 month after the date of certificate of registration, I can give revised tax invoice to recover the GST with respect to outward supplies between the date I am liable to get registered till the date I got the certificate of registration. But suppose if I make application for registration not within 30 days, can I give revised tax invoice? No. So, revised tax invoice can be issued only if the application is made within 30 days. Revised tax invoice cannot be issued if application is not made within 30 days. And what is the time limit within which we need to give revised tax invoice? Within 1 month from the date of certificate of registration. And every registered person has been granted registration with effect from a date earlier than the date of issuance of certificate of registration. He may issue revised tax invoice in respect of taxable supplies effected during the period starting from the effective date of registration till the date of certificate of registration. So, what is the effective date of registration? If you make application for registration within 30 days, the date on which you are liable to get registered is the effective date of registration. If you are not making application within 30 days, the date on which registration certificate is granted. As effective date of registration and the date of certificate of registration is same day, that's why we cannot give revised tax invoice in case of application not made within 30 days. Understood? So, in simple words, what you need to remember, what is revised tax invoice? A revised tax invoice is a document issued by registered person with respect to outward supplies between which period? Between the period the person is liable to get registered till the day they got the certificate of registration. And this revised tax invoice will be given after we get the registration certificate within 1 month. However, revised tax invoice cannot be issued if the application is not made within 30 days. That much you need to remember. Then, receipt voucher. So, receipt voucher is a document which will be given by supplier to recipient whenever the payment is received before preparing the invoice. That is, invoice is not yet given. Advance is collected. For that advance, so there should be some evidence. So, that's why supplier should be giving a receipt voucher to the recipient. So, when advance payment is received, payment received before issuance of invoice, then supplier will give a receipt voucher. Then payment voucher. Payment voucher is given by who is making payment? Recipient. So, recipient will be giving the payment voucher to the supplier when in case the transaction is covered under RCM. When the transaction is covered under RCM, so recipient will be giving payment voucher to the supplier at the time of making payment. Then there is something called as refund voucher. That is, first I received advance. When I received advance, I gave a receipt voucher. Now I returned that advance. I cancelled the supply. I returned the advance. Now in that case, I will be giving a refund voucher. But remember, refund voucher to be given before preparing invoice if you return the amount. Suppose after preparing invoice, if I return the amount, what is the name of the document? Credit note. Credit note, because we prepared invoice. Now to cancel the invoice, we need to give credit note. Understood or not? So, refund voucher is advance receipt for which receipt voucher is issued. If refunded before issuance of invoice, then the refund voucher to be issued. And who will be giving refund voucher to whom? Supplier to recipient. And if amount is refunded after issuance of tax invoice, then what is the name of the document? Credit note. Then there is something called as delivery challan. That is, whenever there is a movement of goods and that movement of goods is without involving any supply. Without involving any supply means what? Say goods sent on job work, sale on approval or on return basis, or goods sent from head office to branch office within the state for which they have not obtained separate registration. These are some examples of supply not involved, but there is movement of goods. Then in that case, that movement of goods should accompany a document called as delivery challan, and even we need to give a e-way bill. We studied e-way bill. E-way bill is required whether the supply that is there or not. But if there is a movement of goods, we need to give e-way bill. So what are the documents that are required in that case? Delivery challan plus e-way bill. Understood? Then next one. So the consignor may issue delivery challan for the purpose of supply of liquid gas where the quantity at the time of removal is not known. That is, I am taking the liquid gas. I don't know how much the buyer will buy. So therefore, I will prepare a delivery challan. Same way, goods sent on job work or transportation of goods for reasons other than by way of supply. So means whenever there is movement of goods without involving supply, the name of the document is delivery challan. Who will be giving delivery challan to whom? Supplier will be giving to recipient. Then you can see in the next page. So how many copies of invoice should be prepared? In case of goods, invoice should be prepared in triplicate, 3 copies. Original copy for the recipient, duplicate copy for transporter, and third copy for the supplier. In case of goods, 3 copies. Original for the buyer, duplicate for the transporter, third copy for the supplier accounting purpose. In case of services, only 2 copies, duplicate. So original for the recipient and duplicate for the supplier. Then we have 2 important concepts, that is e-invoice and dynamic QR code. So what is this e-invoice means? E-invoice means a normal invoice we will prepare, and for that invoice we upload in the portal, and we will be obtaining 3 things for that normal invoice. Then that normal invoice will become a e-invoice. What are those 3 things we need to obtain from the portal? Invoice reference number. Invoice reference number. Mainly this e-invoice has been brought in order to control the fake invoices. The moment I upload the invoice into the portal, the invoice is captured. So which means tomorrow the supplier cannot say I am not required to pay tax. He need to pay the tax and the recipient will get the ITC. So that is the advantage of e-invoice. So what we need to do? A normal invoice we prepare. That normal invoice we will upload it into a portal. What is that portal? Invoice registration portal. And in that portal, once we upload, we will obtain 3 things for that normal invoice. That is invoice reference number, quick response code, QR code, and digital signature. So these 3 things once we get to this normal invoice, now this invoice is called as a e-invoice. Understood or not? So tell me, what is a e-invoice? Obtaining the following from invoice registration portal for a normal tax invoice is known as e-invoice. What are those following? Invoice reference number, QR code, and digital signature. Okay, then that is e-invoice. And what is the e-invoice process? You can see that in page number 72. E-invoice process. So first, there is a taxpayer. That taxpayer will prepare the invoice as per the billing or ERP system. Then he will convert that invoice into .json file, JavaScript object notation. So then he will upload it into invoice registration portal using the API plugins. Okay, so application interface plugins. So using that, they will upload this JSON file to invoice registration portal. Then this invoice registration portal will be giving 3 things, that is invoice reference number, digital signature, and QR code. From there, it will go to GST system and e-way bill system, which means again in GST portal and e-way bill portal, we don't have to enter the invoice details. Automatically the data will be captured. and in GST system, suppliers GSTR1 will be updated and recipients GSTR2B will be updated. So they don't have to do any data entry. Is it clear or not? So suppliers GSTR1 is updated and recipients GSTR2B is updated, and the buyer can anytime check whether this invoice is correct or not by entering the invoice reference number in the portal. So these are the process 8 points. So first, normal invoice will be prepared in billing. Second, convert into .json file. Third, upload it into the portal. So using API, and in the portal they will be giving three things: invoice reference number, digital signature, QR code. Then it will be sent to e-waybill system and GST system. In the GST system, suppliers GSTR1 gets updated and recipients 2B gets updated. Okay. So what is the advantage of e-invoicing? The advantage of e-invoicing is that auto-populated invoices in GSTR1 and GSTR2B and e-waybill. So again, they don't have to do data entry and it will eliminate the fake invoices. Okay. So then this e-invoice, okay, we understood. Then what is dynamic QR code in invoice? So first we are discussing what is e-invoice, what is dynamic QR code, and then we will see to whom it is applicable, to whom it is not applicable. Okay. First we studied e-invoice. You understood that e-invoice now? Now, dynamic QR code. Dynamic QR code does not mean generating anything from the portal, but we have to collect the payment by scanning this QR code. That is known as dynamic QR code. For example, so whenever you go to a shop, you scan the QR code and you enter the amount and you will pay. That is called as static QR code, wherein any amount, the code will be same. But dynamic QR code is like, if you buy anything from Amazon or Flipkart, and if you select pay on delivery option, at the time when the person delivers the product to you, when you say that I will make through GPay or PhonePe, he will create one ID, one code, and he will give it to you. The moment you scan it, the amount also will automatically come. That is called as dynamic QR code. So the payment should be collected by scanning the dynamic QR code, mainly to encourage digital payments. Government has brought this. Okay. And in this case, dynamic QR code will be prepared. The code will be generated from the government portal, sir. No. Dynamic QR code will be prepared through third-party applications. We have a lot of apps wherein we can prepare a dynamic QR code. But while generating a dynamic QR code, we need to enter 5 details. Mentioning these 5 details, we need to prepare a dynamic QR code. There are third-party applications, bank apps, and payment gateway apps. So even POS devices also is having dynamic QR code facility. So this dynamic QR code should be entered should be generated by entering 5 details. What are those 5 details? GSTIN of the supplier. You please see there. GSTIN of supplier. Then UPI ID of the supplier. Then bank account and IFSC code of the supplier. Then invoice number and date. Then invoice amount with breakup of value and tax. Entering these 5, if we generate a code, that is called as dynamic QR code. First 3 is static, correct? Bank, that is bank details will be static, UPI ID will be static, supplier GSTIN will be static. Actually, what changes for every invoice is invoice number and date and invoice amount with breakup of value and tax. Understood? So what are the 5 fields, pa? GSTIN of supplier, UPI ID of supplier, bank account and IFSC code of the supplier, invoice number and date, invoice amount with breakup of value and tax. Then UPI ID of the supplier, we have an exception. That is, if the payment is not collected by supplier but collected by a e-commerce operator or a courier agency, then that courier agency or e-commerce operator UPI ID should be given. For example, I am selling a product through Amazon. I am not collecting the money directly, but I authorize Amazon to collect. So whose UPI ID should be mentioned? Amazon's UPI ID should be mentioned. Then bank account and IFSC code of the supplier. Exception is not required if UPI ID is linked with the bank account. So that is, generally UPI ID will be linked with the bank account. No sir, not necessary always. because I have a bank account in IndusInd Bank, but my UPI ID is OK Axis. Okay, I don't have bank account in Axis Bank, but my UPI ID is OK Axis because only limited banks are giving UPI IDs. So other banks are having association like SBI, HDFC, then ICICI, Axis. These are the only banks, like limited banks, which will be giving UPI ID. But there are many banks in India. So all banks are not providing UPI ID. So therefore, if I am having account in HDFC Bank, then definitely my UPI ID will be linked with HDFC Bank. Then no need to give UPI ID separately. But if my bank account is not connected to UPI ID, means my bank is not giving UPI, so then in that case, so I have to mention the UPI ID as well as bank account. Is it clear? Then invoice number and date. For this invoice number and date, generally in case of retail sales means there will be multiple counters. When you go to a supermarket, some 6-7 counters will be there. In these 6-7 counters, parallelly they will be generating invoices. So invoice number cannot be entered because they cannot discuss and enter as to what is the invoice number. That's why every counter, they can create a unique reference number. That unique reference number can be entered in the place of invoice number and date. Then invoice amount with breakup of value and tax. That is, generally we are receiving money before preparing invoice. No need to collect the money through dynamic QR code because already money collected. You understood? Money is collected before preparing invoice. Now no need to collect through QR code. So no need to enter QR code in the invoice because the payment is already collected. However, if part payment is collected before invoice and remaining amount is collected after invoice, then for what amount the dynamic QR code should be generated? For the remaining amount which is to be collected after preparing the invoice. So part payment received before invoice and remaining after invoice, then only the balance due should be mentioned. And exception to mentioning dynamic QR code invoice is what? If payment is received before or at the time of generating invoice and cross-reference of such payment is received, is entered, that is sufficient. No need to enter dynamic QR code in invoice. When no need to enter dynamic QR code in invoice? If the payment is collected before preparing the invoice, then the payment reference if we give, that is sufficient. Then next, to whom e-invoice and dynamic QR code is not applicable. This is very, very important for short note. But you should not write the mnemonic in the exam. You should not write biggest or you should not write big toe like that. You have to explain. See, mnemonics and all you should remember, but you should not write in the exam. In exam, you have to explain that and write. Okay. First, e-invoice is not applicable in case of biggest. So these two are important short note questions. It can be asked. Biggest is B for banking company, I for insurance company, then G for GTA, goods transport agency. Another G is government department or local authority. Then E for exhibition of film in a multiplex theater. So like PVR cinemas, etc. and all. If you see PVR cinemas, definitely, so their turnover is very big, but they are not required to give any invoice. Okay. So E for exhibition of film in a multiplex theater. Then S for SEZ unit. So inside a special economic zone, there is a unit. They are not required to give e-invoice. And T for transportation of passengers by any mode, not transportation of goods. For example, airlines or railways or any transporter who is transporting people. So they are not required to give e-invoice. So total, this biggest, this case, e-invoice not required. So what is the full form of the biggest? Can you tell me? B for banking company, I for insurance company, G for GTA, then government department or local authority, E exhibition of film in a multiplex theater, S SEZ unit, then T transportation of passengers by any mode. Who are not required to give dynamic QR code is same as biggest, but minus S, SEZ unit is removed. In that place, we have OIDR supplier. So remember this as big toe. So B, same, banking company. I, same, insurance company. G, GTA. Another G, so government department, local authority. T also same, transportation of passengers any mode. O alone extra. What is generally O? We have heard OIDR supplier. So OIDR supplier located outside India making supply to non-taxable online recipient in India. Then E is same, exhibition of film in a multiplex theater. So these cases dynamic QR code is not required. So anyway the question can be asked, don't interchange and write. For e-invoice it is biggest, for dynamic QR code it is big 2. Only difference is this place. So here SEZ unit and here OIDR supplier. Then next, so here to whom e-invoice and dynamic QR code is applicable. So take page number 71, 5 minutes pa, we will complete and we will take break. So to whom e-invoice and dynamic QR code will be applicable. If aggregate turnover in any previous year between 2017-18 to 2021-22, aggregate turnover between 2017-18 to 2021-22, any one year, if it does not exceed 10 crores, neither e-invoice nor dynamic QR code. Okay. Any previous year between 17-18 to 21-22, if it does not exceed 10 crores, any year it does not exceed 10 crores, then neither e-invoice nor dynamic QR code. Suppose if the turnover exceeds 10 crores but does not exceed 500 crores, for B2B supplies they need to give e-invoice, for B2C supplies they are not required to give dynamic QR code. But if the aggregate turnover during any previous year between 17-18 to 21-22 exceeds 500 crores, for B2B they have to give e-invoice, for B2C dynamic QR code. So therefore e-invoice is applicable only in case of B2B supplies. What is B2B supplies means? Supplies to a registered person, that is B2B. B2C means supplies to a unregistered person. So in case of B2B supplies only e-invoice required. That too when required, if aggregate turnover in any one financial year from 17-18 to 21-22 exceeds 10 crores. And when it is dynamic QR code B2C, that too in any one year if the aggregate turnover during previous year, any one year exceeds 500 crores. And invoice should be in prescribed form INV1 and it is optional for a taxpayer who is required to give e-invoice. So only when their aggregate turnover exceed 10 crores. But suppose if it does not exceed 10 crores also can I give? Yes, no one will stop. And e-invoice gets auto-populated in GSTR1 and e-way bill. One important point is there with respect to e-invoice. Remember, I am required to give e-invoice, but I have not given e-invoice. I gave a normal invoice and I entered this normal invoice in GSTR1 and it came in your 2B. Even then you cannot take ITC because I have not given e-invoice. So whenever for a supplier, e-invoice is applicable. But if that supplier has not given e-invoice but gave a normal invoice, we cannot take ITC with respect to that invoice even though it is reflected in our GSTR 2B. Understood? So there is no need to carry physical copy of the invoice if e-invoice is prepared, because invoice needs to be prepared in 3 copies, original, duplicate, triplicate, like that. But that is not required in case of e-invoice. So just if you communicate the QR code to the officer whenever they stop the vehicle, that is sufficient. Then next, so we need to mention that if you are not required to give e-invoice, that's an amendment as the recipient cannot take ITC. If suppose you are required to give e-invoice but you are not giving e-invoice, then recipient cannot take ITC. Then how recipient will know whether you are supposed to give e-invoice or not supposed to give e-invoice? Suppose if you are covered under this biggest cases, then you need to give a declaration that even though my turnover exceeds the limit, but as I am covered under this exception list, so I am not required to give e-invoice. Like that we need to give a declaration in the invoice. That is this. Then next, illustrations and FAQs in this regard. X Limited making outward supplies taxable under RCM 9(3). And X Limited is registered for the current year 2022-23. Aggregate turnover during 21-22 is 80 crores, means it exceeds 10 crores. And X Limited also makes supplies on which they need to pay GST under FCM. Whether e-invoice is required. Listen carefully. My aggregate turnover during previous year exceeds 10 crores per. I am making supply covered under RCM. Now in this case, should I give e-invoice? I am not required to pay. You are required to pay. Let it be. Whether I pay tax or you pay tax, it is my outward supply now. So I have to give e-invoice. So e-invoice is required with respect to outward supply, whether it is covered under FCM or RCM. Now, in one case we discussed that invoice needs to be given by recipient to supplier. RCM. Are the inward supplier, outward supplier, recipient. For recipient, it is inward supply or outward supply? Inward supply. So, e-invoice is only in case of outward supply. So, for inward supplies, e-invoice is not applicable. So, it is an inward supply and not an outward supply. So, for inward supplies, e-invoice is not applicable even if turnover exceeds 10 crores. Then, whether e-invoice or dynamic QR code invoice is required in case of supplies to UIN holder, because I discussed while discussing registration chapter that UIN holder, we need to treat it as B2B supplies, correct? We need to treat it as B2B supplies. That is only for normal invoice. But when it comes to e-invoice, we will not treat it as B2B supplies, means it will be B2C only. Means we need to give e-invoice or dynamic QR code. Dynamic QR code in invoice. So, any person who has obtained UIN is not a registered person. Therefore, any invoice issued to that person shall be treated as B2C supply for e-invoice purpose. Means e-invoice is not required, only dynamic QR code. Then, in case of exports, always e-invoice is required, but dynamic QR code is not required. In other cases, SEZ unit is specified now in that biggest. That's why e-invoice not required. So, for B2B supplies, e-invoice. For B2C supplies, dynamic QR code. But for SEZ unit, it is not given for e-invoice. That's why not required. But whether SEZ unit is required to give dynamic QR code? Yes. Because for the dynamic QR code, what is the list? Big toe. In that big toe, SEZ unit is not there. Whether dynamic QR code is required in case of recipient of service located outside India? No. Because how the person located outside India can make the payment through UPI? So he cannot make the payment through UPI because UPI is something which is there in India. So due to that reason, dynamic QR code is not applicable. Then HSN code in tax invoice. Every person who is preparing the tax invoice should mention the HSN code in the tax invoice and how many digits of HSN code. Usually HSN code is a 8-digit code. So HSN refers to harmonized system of nomenclature, which is a 8-digit code. And in that 8-digit means for every product there is a 8-digit code. But if my aggregate turnover during the previous year does not exceed 5 crores, then I need to enter 4 digits. That too in case of B2B only. In case of B2C, it is optional. But if my aggregate turnover during previous year exceeds 5 crores, let it be B2B or B2C, I need to enter 6 digits. So this is important for MCQ. My aggregate turnover during previous year does not exceed 5 crores. For B2B, 4 digits. For B2C, optional. Then if my aggregate turnover during the previous year exceeds 5 crores, for B2B or B2C, it will be 6 digits. Okay. Then see this point already I discussed, that is before issuing invoice, if we receive advance, what is the name of the document? Receipt voucher. After issuing invoice, if the payment is received, whether recipient voucher is mandatory? No. Suppose if you give the money, if you refund the amount before invoice, what is the name of the document? Refund voucher. Suppose if you have already paid tax, get the refund of GST paid. Suppose if the refund is given or supply is cancelled after invoice, what is the name of the document? Credit note. But for credit note, there is a time limit. What is that? 30th November of succeeding financial year. If I cannot give credit note, is there any alternative to credit note? Yes, I can get refund of tax under excess payment of tax. Again, I am repeating. If I can give credit note, I will reduce my liability. If I cannot give credit note, is there any alternative? Yes, option 2, refund can be claimed. So we completed fully invoice and time of supply.